Hi, I am Kacang Kevin. The Catholic Jubilee Year, established in the year 1300 by Pope Boniface VIII, is rooted in the Jewish tradition of releasing prisoners, forgiving debts, and restoring harmony every 50 years. The Catholic Church celebrates its ordinary Jubilee every 25 years, and Pope Francis has chosen a theme of hope to be specific Pilgrims of Hope in this year's Jubilee. The Jubilee Year is always related to some kind of pardon or act of clemency, and in his World Peace Day message, the Holy Father has called on nations to abolish the death penalty, forgive developing nations' debts, and allocate arms spending to fight hunger and climate change. In this video, I speak to a former Member of Parliament who is also an advocate of abolishing the death penalty. She is Kasthuri Patto. Kasthuri, to begin, Pope Francis has called for the abolition of the death penalty in the Jubilee Year. This is something very close to the Holy Father's heart. But generally, how serious do people take this issue?
I think that the conversation on the abolition of the death penalty, particularly for this year, has reached a certain level of, I would say, stirring interest, even amongst conversation pieces of lay people. So, of course, I was thrilled and extremely grateful that a person like Pope Francis, not just a religious leader, but a global leader, to call for the abolition of the death penalty. You cannot speak about the gift of life without speaking about death itself. And as Catholics, if you believe that God gives, then you also believe that God takes. Now, this is very fundamental, but I believe when Pope Francis called for the abolition of the death penalty, there's a greater message and a meaning to this clarion call. It is a reflection, it is a conversation on justice, on mercy, on compassion, and above all, the conversation on truth. And as Catholics, I think we must put on our Catholic hats when we speak about the death penalty.
But that's the thing, as Catholics, we find it difficult to draw the line on justice and mercy.
The death penalty often is like a switch. It's like an on-off switch in a person's conscience, heart, or mind. In principle, we all say that we believe in forgiveness, mercy, and compassion, and we don't believe in an eye for an eye. But all of a sudden, you read this ghastly, horrible, sad murder, and all the gruesome details out in the press. And your first instinct is, how can this person do that? He must be an animal, and he must suffer the same way the victim suffered. And a person like this must be hanged. So at that moment, obviously, we are just acting on the emotion at that time. But when you look at the subject and the conversation of the death penalty, as how I've been looking at it, or rather, moving in the direction, I was just like everyone else as well, feeling just, it's like a knee-jerk reaction, an eye for an eye. But you will understand political systems, you will understand there's corruption involved, there's abuses of power, there's how the law is applied to different classes of society. And I've said this before, that in Malaysia, most of the people on death row come from the B40, if not on the fringes of M40 category. Now, are we saying that people in powerful and privileged positions don't make mistakes? They don't commit crimes? We all know that people of every level and every economic status in the country, if not the world, commit different types of crimes. But why some people get away with it and some don't? And this is what we're talking about. Talking about the death penalty, I believe in the context of what Pope Francis said, was speaking about how we look at people, whether they have access to justice, whether their voices, the truth of the matter has been heard by everyone or not. Whether we're talking about equality, meaning that you are given an equal platform as everyone else to speak. Was justice done in your case? And indeed, for perpetrators, I believe in second chances. I believe that if you commit a crime, that you must be punished. I don't believe the death penalty is a punishment for how heinous of a crime that is committed.
Well, that's fine. So that's what you believe. But it's not mandatory for a Catholic to hold one view over the other. So, how would you frame an argument for abolishing the death penalty?
Oh, sure. So I've always said, and perhaps even some may disagree with me on this, but I believe that when looked from a bird's eye point of view, that Jesus was a victim of the death penalty. He was given a sentence. It was a mistrial from the start. It was people first saying that this is a man who claimed to be the king, the son of God, etc. And this offended the rulers and the emperors at that time, who were very fixed on, I'm king and there's no discussion about it. I'm the ruler, I'm the boss and there's no discussion about it. And here comes a man who's, in their eyes, of no status to them, challenging their authority, challenging their wisdom and their lineage, their royal lineage. And so it was a mistrial from the start. And Jesus, was he tried fairly? No. And this was done by leaders who did not want to take any accountability or responsibility for their action. They just put Jesus and another criminal and asked the public to decide. And this was a public that was not given the right information. This was a public that was not fed the right knowledge. This was a public that was misinformed. And so you want to keep your hands clean, and then you push Jesus and this other criminal to the crowd and say, now you decide, what do we do with these two? So it was a government who did not want to take responsibility over their action. It was a misinformed crowd, and in essence, a mistrial. And this is what so many people on death row today face in the world.
Now, if we move away from religion, a common perception is one must be punished for the crime they commit, or that the death penalty is a deterrent. What would you say to that?
This great debate on, is the death penalty effective? And that's the reason this whole conversation is here, is the death penalty was meant to be a deterrent. It was meant to, when a government, and back in those days, public hangings were very common. Public hanging was sending a message to the people, to the masses. If you do this, you end up like this. And then, people are traumatized when they see it. But in this time and age, we see that it is not necessarily the guilty who are executed. And even if you are guilty, should you be executed? And are we 100% sure, like beyond doubt, that this person has been responsible for it? What about war crimes? What about genocide? Are we going to hold world leaders accountable for their actions? And who are all those people in that line of command that have carried out this act of extinguishing and executing and killing people? And today, Kevin, we are in Malaysia, where thankfully there are a lot of voices of reason and conscience to hold the government accountable and in check. But what about countries where freedom of speech even is trampled upon? In Iran, hundreds and hundreds of activists have been executed just because they were political dissents. So if it can happen in Iran, I don't want to say it, but this kind of trends are easy to follow in different countries. Many dictatorships often lean in that direction. They learn from each other. So I think it's important that people who share the passion to see a more just world without the death penalty, which is achievable, you can have a just world without the death penalty. The death penalty clearly has been proven to be not a deterrent. Crimes have increased all over the world, and if we're talking about the Malaysian context, there have been more people on death row over the past years, increasing in percentage every year. It's not a deterrent. People don't think when I do it, I'm going to be hanged, for it.
In 2023, Malaysia took the critical step of abolishing the mandatory death penalty, and I believe there's some kind of moratorium on executions. So, what happens now?
So while we do have a moratorium, and this is good, and let's not also forget at the UN General Assembly, Malaysia, amongst the many, many countries, also voted in support of a moratorium on a global, worldwide moratorium on the death penalty. It's a shame because in Southeast Asia, we do still have our counterparts some who abstained, and some who supported, some who objected, sorry, that no, we don't agree with the moratorium. We don't need a worldwide moratorium on the death penalty. So this, your next question could be, what happened to all those 1,000 over people who were on death row prior to the abolition of the mandatory death penalty? So what we have now is a resentencing act where all of them, all these 1,000 over people on different levels of their appeals, and this is in according to the law, those who have exhausted all their appeal and perhaps waiting for a royal pardon. And let's also remember that every state in Malaysia has a pardons board where the Sultan on his birthday can decide to give a full pardon to people on death row in his state. And then the Agong himself, Agong can also give a royal pardon. Now, if they have not qualified for that or have gone through that and rejected, then this goes into the sentencing sort of sentencing hearing.
Now, while this is a huge step for Malaysia, some countries in other parts of the world, especially in Europe, have moved quicker in abolishing the death penalty. Why is that?
I think it's also a more open and frank conversation on the application of the law on people. I think it starts with a more open and transparent judiciary, one that penalizes war criminals, as what we have seen also in Europe. There are hundreds, if not thousands of years of brutality and ethnic cleansing and genocide. And we in Asia, or particularly Southeast Asia, more countries that have been colonized by the colonizers. So we feel that, and given the cultural upbringing, we feel that forgiveness is giving into the crime. Letting somebody go, releasing someone is being soft on crime. And I think this is something we really have to get our messaging across correctly, that abolishing the death penalty does not mean that any government is soft on crime. It just means that you are moving in the direction of a more fair criminal justice system. Because you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when you are in that whole, I would say, the mess of, with the end game being the death penalty, then you realize, that, oh my gosh, it's not the death penalty alone that we need to talk about, but we need to talk about economy, we need to talk about gender, we need to talk about social matters, we need to talk about a government that we need to hold accountable for their actions. We need to talk about leadership. So you cannot just talk about the death penalty like how we spoke about it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and you're just fixated on the crime. Today, we have to talk about mental health, of course. So speaking about the death penalty today means you speak about all this.
So, Kasthuri, to end this conversation, what's your message for Catholic viewers with 2025 being the Jubilee Year?
It's exciting that we can all call ourselves members of this greater family in celebration of the Jubilee Year. And let's not forget our role and our position to advocate for what is in the Bible, to advocate for what is what our faith calls for us to do. We often look at church leaders as ambassadors, but we are all little ambassadors of Christ, walking and journeying in this life to give hope to people who really are lost, who really have no hope, have no one to turn to. So in this, I think the message of forgiveness is so needed, given what a very painful and hurtful year that we have gone through in 2024. Like, you feel you have no control over anything. You just want to hit the stop button and sometimes hit the reset button. So I think 2025 for the Jubilee Year, the call for forgiveness is indeed a great restart button for us to explore our faith, explore our relationship with others and to talk about the gift of life and also to advocate for the abolition of the death penalty.
Kasthuri Patto, thank you for joining me on this online call to discuss the death penalty. I wish you and your family a blessed new year and a holy year in 2025.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Thanks for the space and time, though.